The day of first contact was celebrated as the greatest achievement in human history. Cities across Earth glowed with lights, banners, and fireworks that streaked across the skies. News channels carried the story around the clock, repeating the same message. Humanity was no longer alone. The Zoran Syndicate, an ancient interstellar civilization, had extended a hand of friendship to the people of Earth. The delegation arrived in massive ships that blotted out the stars above orbit. Their appearance was sleek and intimidating, vessels with surfaces polished until they shone like liquid metal. Cameras broadcast the images worldwide, and for a moment, even the most cynical citizens dared to dream of a bright future among the stars. In a carefully choreographed ceremony above Earth's orbit, the Zoran presented what they called a gift to the newest member of the galactic community. The announcement echoed through every speaker and screen as 12 alien warships were revealed, floating like giants beside the alien delegation's flagship. The crowd erupted in cheers, a fleet of humanity's own, given freely, a symbol of trust. Leaders on Earth made speeches about a new dawn. They spoke of alliances, peace, and progress. They assured their people that humanity was finally stepping into its rightful place among the stars. Yet even as applause filled the halls of governments and celebrations filled the streets, a quiet unease began to grow in the minds of those who studied the alien ships more closely. When human engineers were allowed to board the vessels, their excitement quickly turned to dismay. The warships were ancient, scarred with wear, and their systems showed signs of neglect. Much of the technology had been stripped away, leaving gutted compartments and corroded panels. Energy conduits were patched with crude materials. Reactors ran at half their potential, and many of the weapon mounts were either missing or locked beyond repair. At first, officials dismissed these concerns. They insisted the ships were merely in need of maintenance, and that the gift remained a gesture of great generosity. But in the shipyards where the vessels were to be studied and repaired, crews whispered of a different truth. The Zoran had not given Earth a gift. They had given them a burden. It did not take long for the news to leak. Rumors spread across the planet like wildfire, carried by workers who had seen the broken systems firsthand. What the public had been promised as a fleet of cutting-edge warships was nothing more than a collection of rusting hulks. Once the truth could no longer be contained, anger and humiliation swept across nations. The people felt mocked, as though the aliens had played a cruel trick. Some believed it was a test, a way to see how humans would react. Others believed it was a clear message that Earth was not a respected partner, but a child to be patronized with broken toys. Politicians scrambled to contain the outrage, but the damage to humanity's pride had already been done. Still, not everyone saw the so-called gift as an insult. In the shadows of shipyards, engineers and scientists gathered to study every plate of metal, every wire, and every circuit of the alien vessels. What they found beneath the rust and neglect was not useless at all. It was knowledge. The ships, though old and failing, carried traces of technology far beyond anything humanity had ever created. Even the damaged systems told stories. Stories of design philosophies, power management, and structural methods that opened doors to discoveries no human mind had yet considered. A quiet resolve began to take root. The Zoran might have laughed behind their polished words and gestures, but humanity was no stranger to starting with scraps. From the ashes of wars, from broken tools, and from scarcity, human civilizations had always risen. Where others saw only ruin, humanity saw potential. In the months that followed, the alien ships were hauled into orbiting dry docks. Teams of workers, engineers, and scientists labored day and night. They dismantled entire sections, cataloged every component, and studied failures as much as they studied successes. The rusted warships were no longer symbols of mockery. They had become classrooms, laboratories, and stepping stones. On Earth, the bitterness of betrayal transformed into determination. No one spoke of humiliation anymore. Instead, they spoke of building something better, something no alien could mock or dismiss. The Syndicate had given them rust. Humanity would forge iron. Far above the planet, the broken hulls of alien warships hung in silence, waiting. No one yet knew what they would become. But in the quiet hum of shipyards and the sparks of welders' torches, the first whispers of a new fleet began to take shape. Humanity's answer to mockery would not be words. It would be steel, fire, and ships that the galaxy would never forget. The first year after the arrival of the Syndicate gifts was filled with divided voices. Some world leaders clung to the illusion that the alien fleet was a blessing, repeating speeches of cooperation and unity. Others grew more cautious, sensing the deeper motives hidden behind polished smiles and diplomatic words. Whispers began to circle through human networks. Intelligence agencies uncovered reports from alien traders, fragments of intercepted transmissions, and scraps of information that painted a darker picture. The so-called gift had not been a symbol of trust at all. It was a calculated move, one that the Syndicate had used on other young civilizations before. The Syndicate's strategy was simple. By handing over broken warships, they lured primitive worlds into believing they had been uplifted. In truth, those worlds became trapped. The cost of maintaining the decrepit vessels drained their economies, while dependence on Syndicate repairs and supplies ensured loyalty. Every bolt, every power cell, every shard of alloy became a chain binding the lesser species to the Syndicate. Earth was meant to follow that same path. Humanity was expected to waste decades trying to maintain an obsolete fleet, pouring resources into ships that would never truly work, while the Syndicate profited from assistance. To the galactic community, Earth would remain a client world, too weak to resist and too proud to admit the deception. But Earth was not like the others. In the shipyards of orbit, engineers refused to follow the plan. They stripped the warships, down to their skeletons, piece by piece, until the alien craftsmanship lay bare. Teams of scientists documented every circuit and alloy, hungry to understand the principles behind them. They discovered flaws in the Syndicate's designs, inefficiencies that no alien had ever bothered to fix. The knowledge was raw and fragmented, but within it lay the seeds of something new. Instead of trying to repair the broken fleet, humanity began to reinvent it. The corroded plating was melted down and reforged into composites stronger than the original alloys. Power conduits were redesigned to use Earth's fusion technologies, stripped of unnecessary complexity. Weapons, once temperamental and fragile, were reimagined with brutal simplicity, built to fire relentlessly without delicate calibration. Each step forward was a struggle. Resources were limited, and political leaders argued endlessly over the costs. But among the engineers, a quiet pride began to grow. For every broken system they studied, they unlocked a new path forward. For every flaw in the Syndicate's craft, they found a way to improve it. Humanity was not patching together a failed fleet. They were building something entirely their own. Meanwhile, rumors of Earth's progress spread beyond the planet. Syndicate observers returned to report that humans were dismantling the gifts instead of relying on Syndicate assistance. The reaction within the alien hierarchy was laughter at first. To them, humans were naive children, wasting effort on projects they could not hope to complete. No one believed Earth could truly understand, let alone master, the complexities of interstellar engineering, yet the reports kept coming. Syndicate spies spoke of new designs emerging from Earth's shipyards, designs that did not match the old warships at all. The aliens dismissed them as crude imitations. Still, unease began to ripple through their ranks. On Earth, the movement gained momentum. Ordinary citizens, once humiliated by the gift, began to take pride in the work being done above the skies. Factories shifted production to supply shipyards. Universities launched new programs dedicated to xenotechnology. Even rival nations found themselves cooperating, driven by the shared dream of proving humanity's worth. What began as scattered teams of engineers evolved into a global project. In orbit, the shells of Syndicate ships floated like relics of a past mistake, while alongside them, the framework of something far more imposing began to rise. Ships with lines sharper than the Syndicate's smooth curves, vessels built not for ceremony but for survival. They were not graceful, but they were unmistakably human. The Syndicate believed they had shackled Earth with broken promises. Instead, they had ignited something far more dangerous. Humanity had seen through the deception, and in their determination, they had found a purpose. Late one evening, as sparks lit the interior of a half-assembled hull, an old engineer watched welders at work. His voice was quiet, but it carried to those nearby. "They gave us rust," he said with a faint smile. "We'll give them dread." The words spread like fire, repeated in workshops, classrooms, and military briefings. It was no longer about repairing what was broken. It was about creating something new, something no alien could control. The Syndicate had underestimated humanity. Soon, the galaxy would learn what that mistake would cost. The skeletal frames of half-finished ships hung in orbit like shadows of a future still uncertain. To the untrained eye, they looked fragile, bare ribs of metal floating in silence, far from the sleek perfection of Syndicate warships. But to those who labored on them, these skeletons represented something far greater. They were proof that humanity would not bow. Months of relentless work had reshaped the project. No longer was it about salvaging scraps. Now it was about building a fleet that carried humanity's own fingerprint. Every design choice reflected not only what had been learned from Syndicate technology, but also what humanity had always done best: improvising, adapting, and simplifying. In one shipyard, engineers gathered around a newly forged alloy plate. It was not as beautiful as the shimmering Syndicate metals, but when tested, it absorbed impact far beyond what the aliens thought possible. In another lab, a propulsion team tested a fusion drive that ran hotter, cleaner, and with fewer moving parts than the alien equivalent. Weapons specialists stripped down fragile plasma systems and rebuilt them into rail cannons, weapons that fired tungsten slugs at speeds too fast for any known shield to absorb indefinitely. It was not elegance, it was endurance. Where the Syndicate valued precision and tradition, humanity valued resilience and raw power. As the first prototypes neared completion, debates raged on Earth. Politicians questioned the cost of building warships when there was no declared war. Some feared provoking the Syndicate, believing humanity should remain silent and grateful. But those voices grew quieter with each passing month, drowned out by the momentum of progress. Ordinary citizens, watching construction reports broadcast across networks, saw the ships as symbols of defiance. Industries surged, economies aligned, and rival nations began cooperating in ways that had seemed impossible before. For the first time in history, humanity's divisions were overshadowed by a shared vision of the future. On a clear morning above the Pacific Ocean, the first completed prototype slid free of its scaffolding. Cameras captured every detail as the massive vessel drifted from the shipyard into open space. It was unlike anything seen before, its hull layered in angled armor, its engines glowing with fierce intensity, and its decks bristling with weapons. Designed not for display, but for survival. The Syndicate observers stationed nearby watched in silence. At first, they dismissed it as a crude experiment. But when the ship ran through its trial maneuvers, when its engines roared and its cannons fired with perfect synchronization, they could no longer laugh. They transmitted reports back to their superiors, warnings that humans were no longer playing the role they had been assigned. Within the ship itself, the crew felt the weight of history pressing upon them. Every corridor hummed with new power. Every console flickered with human-made systems adapted from alien fragments. The captain, a veteran who had once flown Earth's primitive orbital craft, looked upon the bridge and realized this was no longer about catching up to the galaxy. This was about stepping ahead. When the first live-fire test was conducted, the results shocked even the engineers. The Dreadnoughts' rail cannons tore through target drones with such force that no conventional shield could withstand the barrage. Its armor, tested against heavy impacts, absorbed punishment without buckling. Its reactor output exceeded projections, sustaining continuous power that allowed the ship to fight far longer than Syndicate vessels of similar size. The Syndicate had dismissed humans as a minor species incapable of real innovation. But what they failed to understand was that humans had never needed to copy. They needed only a glimpse of possibility, and from there they would build something entirely new. Word of the prototype's success spread quickly across Earth. Citizens watched with awe as footage showed the massive ship moving with precision, firing weapons with unmatched fury. They called it many names: Defiance, Ironclad, Sentinel, but the term that stuck came from a journalist who described it as a dreadnought born from rust and fire. The name spread until it became the symbol of an era. The dreadnought was not just a ship, it was a statement. In orbit, construction accelerated. What began as one prototype became several. Shipyards expanded, drawing upon resources from every corner of the planet. New crews were trained, new weapons tested, and new designs pushed into reality. The Syndicate had tried to chain humanity with rusted hulks, but instead, they had given them the key to unlocking their own potential. From the ashes of betrayal, a fleet was rising. A fleet that would not be ignored. A fleet that would one day change the balance of the galaxy forever. When the Syndicate delegation returned to Earth orbit 2 years later, they expected to find progress stalled. Their records predicted that the human fleet would still be in disarray, the old hulks patched together but barely functional. They came prepared with polite smiles and thinly veiled condescension, ready to remind humanity of their place in the grand hierarchy of civilizations. Their ships arrived with pomp, gliding into orbit like silver blades against the stars. They expected admiration, perhaps even awe. Instead, they were greeted by silence, an unsettling quiet as their vessels slipped into position above the blue curve of Earth. It was then that the first shadow fell across them. Emerging from the darkness of orbit, a shape appeared. At first, the Syndicate mistook it for one of their own gifts, refurbished and clumsily repaired. But as the ship turned, its true form revealed itself. The hull was angled and armored, its dark plating absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Massive cannons lined its flanks, glowing faintly as power surged through their coils. Engines at the rear burned with a steady, ominous pulse. The Syndicate emissaries whispered among themselves, unease creeping into their voices. This was no repaired relic. This was something new. Humanity called it the Vigilant, the first of their completed dreadnoughts. It was larger than the Syndicate cruisers that had escorted the delegation, heavier in armor and bristling with firepower. Its design philosophy was alien in itself, not elegant, not ceremonial, but purposeful in every line. The Vigilant moved into position, flanked by 2 more dreadnoughts still undergoing trials. Even incomplete, they radiated strength. The Syndicate's sleek cruisers suddenly looked fragile in comparison, their polished surfaces no match for the grim presence of these human-built leviathans. On Earth, the broadcast was carried live. Billions watched as the alien emissaries were escorted into orbiting stations, their confidence wavering. Cameras captured every glance of unease, every forced smile. For once, humanity was not looking up in awe. They were watching with pride. Inside the station's council chamber, the Syndicate delegation attempted to maintain control. Their leader, tall and draped in shimmering fabric, spoke with measured calm. "We are impressed," he said slowly, his voice carrying both curiosity and caution. "It seems you have taken our gifts and reinterpreted them. How industrious of you." The human representatives exchanged glances but said nothing. It was not necessary. The dreadnoughts outside spoke louder than words ever could, behind closed doors. Syndicate officers transmitted frantic reports back to their fleet command. Their observations confirmed the impossible. Humanity had not only understood their technology, they had surpassed it. Shielding systems that should have been decades beyond Earth's grasp were already being tested. Weapons built on crude principles delivered firepower that no standard Syndicate defense could absorb indefinitely. Even their reactors, designed for efficiency and longevity, outperformed Syndicate standards in ways that defied explanation. The Syndicate had seen civilizations rise before, but none had learned this quickly. None had turned derelict gifts into something entirely new. For the first time, unease hardened into fear. On Earth, ordinary citizens celebrated the unveiling of the Vigilant. Images of the massive dreadnought circulated through every screen and network, its dark silhouette becoming a symbol of pride. Children drew its shape in classrooms. Factories hung banners that bore its name. Where once humanity had been mocked, now they stood on the edge of commanding respect. The Syndicate delegation departed with stiff words and uneasy promises of continued partnership. But the facade was cracking. They no longer looked at Earth as a client world. They looked at it as a problem. As their silver ships slipped away into the darkness, the Syndicate emissaries knew the truth they would never admit aloud. Humanity had broken the chain. What was meant to be a burden had become a weapon. What was meant to humiliate had forged strength. In orbit, the Vigilant drifted in silence, its dark hull reflecting no light, its engines pulsing with restrained power. It was a warning written in steel. The galaxy had mocked humanity. Now it began to wonder what would happen when those dreadnoughts were unleashed. The warning came not with words, but with movement. Sensors on the edge of the solar system detected the Syndicate fleet weeks before they arrived. 20 cruisers and their escorts, each bristling with weapons, sailed through the void in flawless formation. The official declaration that followed was dressed in diplomacy, but its message was clear. Humanity had overstepped. The Syndicate was coming to remind Earth of its place. On Earth, panic rippled through governments. Could their new ships truly stand against such numbers? The Vigilant and her sisters were powerful, but they were still few. The old instincts of fear tugged at leaders' hearts. Some suggested surrendering the dreadnoughts, others proposed retreat. But in orbit, among the crews who had built and served on the new fleet, there was no hesitation. They had not labored for years only to bow at the first show of strength. The Syndicate had expected fear. Instead, they would be met with defiance. The battle began above Jupiter. Humanity chose the ground carefully, the gas giant's magnetic. Field and dense radiation zones disrupted long-range scans, turning the arena into a shifting maze. The Syndicate cruisers entered with confidence, certain their superior numbers would overwhelm whatever Earth could muster. Then the Vigilant emerged from the shadows. Flanked by 2 sister dreadnoughts, her engines burned bright as she closed the distance. Rail cannons charged with a rising hum, reactors pouring energy into weapons designed to tear through any shield. The first volley struck before the Syndicate realized what was happening. Tungsten slugs, accelerated to impossible speeds, ripped into the lead cruiser. Its shields flared, cracked, and collapsed in seconds. Armor buckled. A ship that should have stood against hours of bombardment was torn apart in less than a minute. Shock rippled through the Syndicate formation. Their captains scrambled to respond, unleashing plasma fire that bathed the dreadnoughts in light. Yet the Vigilant pressed forward, her hull absorbing impacts that should have crippled her. Human engineers had built her to endure, and endure. She did. The second volley came, and another Syndicate cruiser fell. The battle turned chaotic. Syndicate ships attempted to swarm, but their formations broke against human tactics. The Dreadnoughts did not fight like their alien counterparts. They advanced steadily, trading blow for blow, their weapons relentless and their armor unyielding. Smaller human escorts darted through the chaos, harrying enemy ships with missile salvos and coordinated strikes. What unsettled the Syndicate most was not just the firepower, but the determination. Human crews fought with a ferocity the galaxy had never witnessed. They did not retreat when damaged. They did not pause when outnumbered. They pressed forward, as if every strike of their cannons carried the weight of history itself. By the end of the first hour, 5 Syndicate cruisers lay in ruins. By the second, the rest were in retreat. The proud armada that had entered the system to humble humanity was reduced to scattered survivors fleeing into the darkness. On Earth, the victory was broadcast live. Billions watched as the Vigilant, scarred but unbroken, stood triumphant above Jupiter's storms. Cheers erupted in streets and homes. Children waved flags. Factories fell silent as workers gathered around screens, tears in their eyes. Humanity had done the impossible. They had faced one of the galaxy's oldest powers in open battle and emerged victorious. In the Syndicate's halls of power, the defeat echoed like thunder. No one could ignore it. A fleet of young upstarts had shattered their carefully crafted image of invincibility. What was worse, the battle logs revealed the terrifying truth. Humanity's weapons and designs were not crude imitations. They were innovations, and they were effective. The Syndicate had come to teach a lesson. Instead, they had learned one. In orbit, repairs began at once. The Vigilant and her sisters bore the scars of battle, but they remained functional, their reactors still strong and their cannons still ready. Crews walked their decks with new pride, knowing they had been part of history's turning point. Above the gas giant, in the silence of space, the wreckage of Syndicate ships drifted as a grim reminder. The age of mockery was over. Humanity had been tested in fire, and in that fire they had proven they were ready to stand among the stars on their own terms. The wreckage above Jupiter had not yet cooled before word of the battle spread beyond the solar system. The Syndicate tried to contain the truth, but it was impossible. Too many ships had fled, too many eyes had seen what transpired. Fragments of data streams, sensor recordings, and frantic distress calls spilled into the wider galactic network. The impossible was confirmed again and again. A young species from the edge of the Orion Arm had shattered a Syndicate fleet. And not with borrowed ships, not with patched relics, but with war machines of their own making. The galaxy trembled. In distant star systems, alien governments called emergency councils. Some dismissed the reports at first, calling them exaggerations or clever propaganda. But as more survivors limped back with the same story, denial collapsed into dread. For the first time in centuries, the Syndicate had been defeated in open battle. The implications spread like fire. If humanity could turn rusted relics into dreadnoughts within 2 decades, what would they achieve in another 50 years? What if their unorthodox designs spread beyond their borders? The careful balance of power among the great empires now stood on uncertain ground. On Earth, the victory sparked celebrations that lasted for weeks. Cities lit their skies with displays of light. Children painted dreadnought silhouettes across walls and streets. The crews of the Vigilant and her sister. Ships became legends overnight, their names carried on the lips of billions. For the first time, humanity no longer saw itself as small. They had faced the galaxy's predators and endured. Yet in the shadows of triumph, new challenges emerged. Diplomats from distant powers arrived at Earth, cloaked in cautious smiles and veiled questions. Some came offering treaties, eager to secure an alliance with the species that had humbled the Syndicate. Others came with threats, insisting humanity must reveal the secrets of its new ships or face isolation. In orbit, shipyards doubled their pace. The victory above Jupiter had proven the Dreadnoughts worked, but the fleet remained small. Engineers and builders worked without rest, expanding dry docks, refining weapons, and training new crews. Every nation contributed resources, driven by a mix of pride and survival. Humanity knew the Syndicate would not remain humiliated forever. Beyond Earth, whispers of rebellion began. On Syndicate-controlled worlds, oppressed species took heart from humanity's defiance. They saw in the Dreadnoughts a chance for change, proof that the old order could be challenged. Small uprisings flared across the Syndicate's borders, stretching its resources thin. Within the Syndicate's High Council, panic grew. Their once unshakable authority was now questioned openly. Some argued for negotiation, others for annihilation. But all agreed on one truth. Humanity had become a problem too dangerous to ignore. Meanwhile, on the Vigilant, the crew trained tirelessly. Their victory was celebrated, but they knew it was only the beginning. The Syndicate had been surprised once. They would not be caught unprepared again. The next battle would be harder, the stakes higher. Captain Reyes, standing on the bridge, studied the stars with quiet determination. He knew the galaxy was watching. He knew every decision they made now would shape how humanity was remembered. They underestimated us once, he told his officers. They'll come harder next time. We'll be ready. Back on Earth, ordinary citizens also began to sense the weight of their place in history. Factories no longer just built for pride, they built for survival. Universities turned into training, grounds for engineers, officers, and strategists. Humanity had stepped into the galactic stage, but it was a stage of predators, and the only way to survive was to prove they could stand as equals. Across the galaxy, empires whispered, worried, and planned. Some feared humanity's rise. Others secretly cheered for it, seeing in the Dreadnoughts a chance to weaken the Syndicate's grip. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Order trembled. The Syndicate had tried to chain Earth with rust. Instead, they had forged a rival, and, as Dreadnoughts continued to rise from Earth's shipyards, one truth became clear. The balance of power would never be the same again. The Syndicate's humiliation above Jupiter was not something its rulers could endure. For centuries, they had reigned through fear, their fleets untouchable, their decrees unquestioned. But the defeat at the hands of humans had shaken that illusion. If one species could stand against them, then others might try. The Council declared humanity a threat to stability, a spark that must be extinguished before it grew into a fire. The second war fleet they dispatched was unlike the first. It was not a message or a warning. It was an armada, 50 cruisers, heavy battleships, and carriers bristling with fighters. They swept into human space like a storm, confident sheer numbers would crush this defiant world. But humanity had not been idle. By the time the Syndicate fleet entered the solar system, 10 Dreadnoughts now patrolled alongside smaller escorts. They were not sleek or beautiful, but they were terrifying in their presence. Dark hulls loomed in formation, each ship bristling with weapons designed for relentless fire. The battle began at Saturn's rings. Syndicate forces surged forward, their plasma fire lighting the void. But the Dreadnoughts advanced in disciplined lines, their armor soaking up punishment while their rail cannons thundered in reply. Tungsten slugs tore through enemy shields, ripping battleships apart piece by piece. The Syndicate soon realized they were not facing ordinary soldiers. Human crews fought with a ferocity born of survival. Damaged ships did not retreat. They pressed forward, patching systems mid-battle, adapting in ways Syndicate doctrine had never prepared for. Every human casualty only seemed to harden their resolve. The dreadnought Iron Resolve became the centerpiece of the fight. Struck by repeated volleys, her hull burned, sections venting fire into space, but her cannons never ceased. With a final salvo, she shattered a Syndicate carrier in half, scattering fighters into the void. Her crew, bloodied but unbroken, fought, until the last shot was fired. When the smoke cleared, the armada lay in ruins. Syndicate battleships drifted as lifeless hulks, their formations broken. Of the 50 cruisers, fewer than a dozen managed to retreat. Humanity had suffered losses, but the dreadnoughts remained, their silhouettes scarred but defiant. Across the galaxy, the news hit like an earthquake. The Syndicate had committed overwhelming force and still failed. The myth of their invincibility was gone, and with that collapse, rebellion ignited. On Syndicate-controlled worlds, oppressed species rose up, emboldened by humanity's victories. Colonies that had bent under Syndicate rule now declared independence. Entire fleets mutinied, refusing to fight for masters who could no longer protect them. Human dreadnoughts became more than warships. They became symbols. Images of their dark hulls spread across every channel, painted onto walls, carried as emblems of resistance. The galaxy now looked to Earth not as a child to be mocked, but as a rival, and to many, a savior. The Syndicate Council fractured. Some demanded peace, others demanded total annihilation, but their power was slipping through their claws. Systems defected, trade collapsed, and rivals circled like predators sensing weakness. Human fleets, once defensive, now pressed outward. They struck Syndicate shipyards, freeing enslaved laborers and dismantling supply lines. Every victory drew more allies. Where dreadnoughts appeared, revolts followed. Where revolts flared, the Syndicate's empire crumbled further. In orbit above a liberated colony, Captain Reyes stood on the bridge of the Vigilant, watching survivors cheer as Syndicate banners burned. His officers gathered around him, weary but proud. "This is bigger than us now," one whispered. Reyes nodded. He understood. Humanity had started by defending its home. Now it was leading a storm that could topple an empire. The Syndicate had tried to make Earth an example of submission. Instead, Earth had become an example of defiance. By the end of the year, the Syndicate's power was breaking. Systems that once bowed now stood tall. Dreadnoughts patrolled liberated skies. And in every council chamber across the stars, one. Truth was spoken in hushed voices. The Syndicate's fall had begun, and humanity was the hammer that struck the first blow. The Syndicate capital had once been the heart of a proud empire. Its towers stretched high above a glittering city, and its orbit was ringed with defenses said to be impenetrable. For centuries, no enemy had dared approach it. The Syndicate's rule was law, its fleets unquestioned, its will absolute. But when the human dreadnoughts arrived, silence gripped the skies. The Vigilant led the formation, her hull scarred from countless battles, but still bristling with power. Alongside her sailed the Iron Resolve, the Sentinel, and a dozen more, each a symbol of everything the Syndicate had failed to destroy. Behind them came a coalition of ships from newly freed worlds, vessels crewed by species that had once served under Syndicate chains. The Syndicate's fleets tried to stand. Their warships formed walls of fire, plasma burning across the void. Yet again and again, the dreadnoughts pushed forward. Their cannons roared with unstoppable rhythm, tearing through. Ships that once seemed invincible. Allied fleets surged behind them, overwhelming the defenders. What was once an empire of fear now crumbled piece by piece. On the surface below, Syndicate citizens watched in stunned silence as human warships filled their skies. For generations, they had believed their rulers unshakable. Now they saw dark, hulls cutting through the heavens, carrying the weight of justice their leaders could not escape. The Syndicate Council met in desperation. Their chambers echoed with arguments, voices raised in fear and anger. Some demanded surrender, others insisted on fighting to the last. But their words no longer carried power. Outside, the sound of explosions grew louder as orbital defenses fell. Finally, as the first dreadnought entered low orbit, the council broke. With no choice left, they signaled for terms. When the delegation boarded the Vigilant, they no longer carried themselves with arrogance. Their silks and jewels meant nothing here. They were escorted into the Great Hall, where human officers stood in solemn silence. The syndicate leaders who once had mocked Earth with rusted relics lowered their heads in surrender. Captain Reyes addressed them with calm resolve. His words carried not triumph, but certainty. You sought to chain us with broken gifts. Instead, you forged our strength. Humanity does not kneel. Today, neither shall the galaxy. The syndicate signed their surrender, their empire shattered. Systems that had once lived under their shadow now stood free, and across the stars, the name of Earth spread like wildfire. But the victory was more than military. It was a transformation. Humanity had been born into the galactic community as a species dismissed, underestimated, and mocked. Now they were recognized as equals, not because of favors or politics, but because they had earned it in fire and steel. In the months that followed, treaties were signed. New councils formed, ones that included human voices alongside alien allies, who had fought for their freedom. The Dreadnoughts patrolled not as conquerors, but as guardians, symbols of a new order where no empire could mock or dominate unchecked. Back on Earth, celebrations filled every city. Statues were raised in honor of those who had fallen, and shipyards continued to hum with life, building not only for defense, but for exploration. For the first time, humanity looked at the stars not with fear or resentment, but with purpose. Children, who had once drawn syndicate ships, now sketched dreadnoughts. Families who had once lived in uncertainty now spoke with pride of belonging to a people who had faced the galaxy and stood tall. Captain Reyes, walking the decks of the Vigilant, paused at a viewport to watch the syndicate capital shrink into the distance. His crew stood beside him, weary but proud. They gave us rust, one officer said quietly, repeating the words spoken years before. Reyes nodded, his gaze steady on the stars ahead. And we gave them dread, he replied. The bridge fell silent, each soul knowing they were part of something larger than themselves. Humanity had not only survived, it had changed the galaxy. The syndicate had bowed. The stars now awaited, and in the black depths of space, the dreadnoughts of Earth sailed forward, carrying with them a promise. Humanity would never again be underestimated.